Sri Lanka's Hidden War, the Tamil Tigers and the Vanished Generations. For nearly 30 years, paradise was burning. Behind the postcard beaches and the turquoise waters of Sri Lanka, entire generations disappeared, consumed by a war that refused to end, a war that pitted neighbor against neighbor, and left silence where laughter once lived. It all began long before the first shot was fired. When the British left in 1948, Sri Lanka stepped into independence carrying the weight of division. The Sinhalese were the majority, proud of their language, their history, and their Buddhist faith. The Tamils, who had lived for centuries in the north and east, suddenly found themselves on the margins of their own homeland. In 1956, the government declared Sinhala as the only official language, effectively locking out Tamil speakers from schools, government jobs, and opportunity. To the majority, it was nationalism. To the Tamils, it was the beginning of erasure. Years passed, protests came and went, but the inequality only deepened. Frustration grew into anger, and from that anger emerged a man, Vellapillai Prabhakaran. A quiet, calculating youth from the northern town of Valvatitharai. He watched his people beaten, watched their homes burned, and decided that words had failed. Only war could bring justice now. In the 1970s, Prabhakaran founded the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, the LTTE. Their goal was simple: carve out an independent homeland for Tamils, a nation they would call Tamil Eelam. Their methods, however, would shake the island to its core. 4 years, the Tigers moved in the shadows, robbing banks, attacking police stations, assassinating politicians. But it was 1983 that changed everything. In July of that year, LTTE fighters ambushed an army patrol and killed 13 Sinhalese soldiers. The government's response was catastrophic. In Colombo, mobs roamed the streets with knives and kerosene. Tamils were dragged from their homes and burned. In Colombo, mobs roamed the streets with knives and kerosene. Tamils were dragged from their homes and burned alive. Shops were looted, temples destroyed, and women assaulted as the police stood by. For 7 days, the island bled. By the time it ended, more than 3,000 Tamils were dead and thousands more had fled into exile. That week became known as Black July, and it lit the fuse for a civil war that would last nearly 3 decades. The LTTE rose from the ashes, their ranks swelling with young men and women who had lost everything. They were disciplined, efficient, and absolutely ruthless. Prabhakaran demanded total loyalty. Betrayal was punished by death. Soon, the Tigers controlled vast territories in the north and east. They built their own government, their own police, even their own navy and air force. In their eyes, they were not terrorists. They were freedom fighters, building a homeland from the ruins of oppression. But to the Sri Lankan state, they were an existential threat, a cancer that had to be cut out. The war spread quickly. Soldiers marched into Tamil towns, and the Tigers retaliated with ambushes and bombings. Civilians were caught in between. Entire villages were shelled without warning. Families fled with what little they could carry, walking for days through jungle and swamp, chased by gunfire and hunger. In the 1990s, the island descended into horror. The LTTE expelled over 70,000 Muslims from northern Sri Lanka, giving them just 24 hours to leave. Families left their homes, their fields, and their history behind. No one was safe. The government responded with brutal force. Soldiers rounded up Tamil youth on suspicion of aiding the Tigers. Many never returned. Torture camps sprang up in the south, and mass graves appeared in the north. At Kemeny, investigators later unearthed shallow pits filled with bones, the remains of those who had vanished during the war. The Tigers struck back with suicide bombers, the first organized force in the world to use women as human explosives. They killed politicians, generals, and even Rajiv Gandhi, the former Prime Minister of India, who was assassinated in 1991.
Every act of violence justified the next.
Every death became fuel for revenge. In 1995, government forces launched a massive campaign to retake the Jaffna Peninsula, the heart of Tamil resistance. The Tigers fought fiercely, but the army pushed through. Tens of thousands of civilians were trapped in the crossfire. Entire towns emptied overnight. Children walked barefoot across minefields, carrying siblings on their backs.
The war consumed everything, face, identity, and hope.
The world barely noticed. While other nations debated democracy and globalization, Sri Lanka was dying quietly. Foreign journalists were banned from entering conflict zones. Those who spoke too loudly inside the country, activists, priests, reporters, simply disappeared. Both sides carried out atrocities. The LTTE recruited child soldiers, forced civilians to fight, and executed dissenters. The government bombed hospitals, schools, and refugee camps. Truth itself became a casualty. By 2002, after nearly 20 years of fighting, both sides were exhausted. International pressure forced them into a ceasefire. For the first time in decades, the guns fell silent. In the north, roads reopened. Refugees returned home. There was talk of peace. But peace in Sri Lanka was an illusion. While diplomats shook hands in daylight, both sides quietly rearmed at night. The Tigers continued smuggling weapons through sea routes. The government bought new artillery and aircraft. The truce became nothing more than a pause before the next storm. By 2006, war returned, louder, deadlier, and final. President Mahinda Rajapaksa vowed to end the LTTE once and for all. With modern weaponry and international intelligence, the Sri Lankan army began its most aggressive campaign. Entire regions were sealed off. The north became a prison of mud and fear. As the army advanced, civilians were trapped between two enemies. The Tigers forced them to stay, using them as human shields. The government bombed anyway. Hospitals were hit.
Food and medicine ran out.
Families dug trenches in their yards and prayed they wouldn't be next.
Bodies lay unburied in the heat.
Children starved beside the wounded. The world was watching, but only faintly. The footage was blurry, the reports censored. When the United Nations tried to intervene, it was already too late. In May 2009, after 30 years of bloodshed, the war ended on the banks of the Nandakadal Lagoon.
벌로필러 프로바크런 was dead.
His body lay in the mud, surrounded by soldiers who had once feared his name. The LTTE was finished. But victory came at a cost no one could measure. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed in the final months alone. Many more were herded into rehabilitation camps, where they were interrogated, beaten, or simply disappeared. Families waited for news that never came. Mothers clutched faded photographs of their sons and daughters, the only proof that they had ever lived. The government declared triumph. The war was over, they said. Sri Lanka was free again. But freedom, for many, meant silence. In the Tamil North, towns lay in ruins. Landmines littered the fields where children once played. The army occupied villages, controlling movement, speech, and memory. Those who dared to ask what happened in the no-fire zones were silenced or arrested. The disappeared had no graves. The survivors had no answers. And yet, life went on. Markets reopened. Roads were rebuilt. Tourists returned to the beaches, unaware that just miles away, mothers still waited at bus stops, holding photos of sons who would never return. The war had ended, but the trauma remained, carved into the hearts of those who lived through it. International organizations called for investigations. Reports spoke of war crimes, of systematic killings and deliberate bombings. The government denied everything. The world issued statements and moved on. In the north, people still whisper about the missing. About the bodies that washed ashore after the shelling stopped. About the graves that were filled too quickly. They call them the vanished generations, the men, women, and children who vanished not only from life but from history. Today, Sri Lanka stands united on paper, but divided in memory.
The Sinhalese celebrate victory, the Tamils mourn in silence.
Between them lies a wound that refuses to heal. The jungles that once echoed with gunfire are now quiet. The checkpoints still stand, rusted but present, reminders that peace came through annihilation, not reconciliation. And as the sun sets over Jaffna, casting long shadows across the ruined villages, it's hard not to wonder, what was truly won? For every bullet fired, a life was lost. For every flag raised, a generation vanished. Sri Lanka's hidden war was more than a conflict. It was a collapse of humanity, a story of how a nation can destroy itself in pursuit of purity, power, and pride. And in that silence, between the ashes and the waves, lie the ghosts of those who never got to grow old. The vanished generations who remind us that in war, no one ever truly wins.